Thank you very much. Justin Trudeau is the captain of a sinking ship, sinking under heavy and high debt and taxes, sinking under the heavy weight of pipelines that can't be built and crises at our border. And today, all he did with these crises was shuffle the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Let's go through these failing ministers one at a time. Begin with the Minister of Finance, the worst Minister of Finance in a generation. This is a minister who shattered the Liberals' promise to balance the budget this year. The deficit is not only $20 billion, it is growing. And it will not be balanced for another 20 years, according to Finance Canada's own estimates. This same minister attacked our small businesses, called them tax cheats, and attempted to impose painful and devastating tax increases on them, while ensuring that his family business, Morneau Chappelle, would be exempt from those same tax increases. Now, Prime Minister Trudeau has never had to worry about money, so he doesn't worry about Canadians' money. But that is no reason to keep in place an incompetent finance minister who has failed our country and racked up tens of billions of dollars in promise-breaking and unnecessary debt. And then there's pipelines. When this Prime Minister took office, three of the world's biggest pipeline companies were ready to put shovel in the ground and build pipelines to tide water. All three of those companies have now gone, and not a single inch of steel has been laid or a single ounce of dirt has been moved to build any of those pipelines. Worse yet, Trudeau spent 4.5 billion Canadian tax dollars on a pipeline project that he cannot get built. And yet, the minister responsible for pipelines, who has a bill banning future pipelines, remains in place today. And finally, we have disorder at the border. An unprecedented wave of illegal border crossers have poured into the country, jumping the queue and pushing back the hundreds of thousands of lawful applicants who wish to come and seek refuge or opportunity here in Canada by following the rules. And yet the three ministers who have collectively bungled the border all remain in place today. Today was an opportunity for the Prime Minister to change course from these failures. He has failed to fix his failures. Le Premier ministre Trudeau est le capitaine.
Prime Minister Trudeau is the captain of a sinking ship. It is sinking under the burden of debt and taxes and the crisis at the border. What he has done today is to simply move around the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. He has not tackled the failures of his Minister of Finance, the worst Minister of Finance in a generation. He increased the deficit. He failed to balance the budget in 2019, this year, as he had promised to do. And he has attacked our small and medium businesses with tax increases that were not going to apply to his own business, Morneau Chappelle. I know that Justin Trudeau never needed to worry about money. Therefore, he doesn't worry about Canadians' money. However, he should have removed that minister. Secondly, we have the crisis at the border. Hundreds of thousands of people are crossing the border illegally. And the three ministers responsible for resolving that problem have done nothing to solve it. And today, we find that these three incompetent ministers remain in place. And when it comes to large-scale natural resource projects, they are unable to build them. They are unable to do so due to Liberal legislation that is preventing them from going forward. These projects continue to not be built, and the minister responsible for this failure remains in place. Thank you very much, and I will welcome your questions.
Poilievre, one of the moves that the government did make today was to announce the creation of the Rural Economic Development Portfolio, which is a new portfolio. And I'm wondering if you think that this move and the priorities that the government wants to set could cut in to rural support that the Conservatives haven't kept.
Justin Trudeau has attacked the rural economy. The carbon tax is particularly devastating for rural communities because of the longer travel times and the higher heating costs that go along with living in the countryside. Many rural communities, particularly Indigenous ones, were desperately looking forward to pipeline construction as an opportunity to create jobs and growth in desperate parts of the country that have few opportunities to do so. And I think now, just before the election, as rural Canadians are standing up and fighting back against Trudeau, he says, don't worry, I've created a new government ministry to solve the problems that he created himself. I don't think rural Canadians will be fooled by that.
Okay, can I also ask you a question on an unrelated topic, but what do you make of, or do you have any thoughts on the Chinese sentencing to death a Canadian?
Our Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs has said that the Prime Minister should reach out directly to Chinese officials and, in fact, call President Xi and make the case in favor of the Canadian in question. Obviously, we don't have all of the details on the individual case, but we do believe that Canadians abroad should be treated fairly and given a fair treatment under the law. This is another example, I think, of how the Prime Minister is not taken seriously in the world. We all remember he said that he admired the basic Chinese dictatorship as his most favorite jurisdiction in the world. I'm not sure he still feels that way, but the Chinese leadership does not take him seriously. They called him Little Potato. They have shown him complete disrespect, and this is consistent with his reputation all around the world. He clowned around in India and was laughed out of the country. He started, his ministers have started Twitter wars with other countries. He allowed Donald Trump to walk all over him and keep in place steel, aluminum, and softwood tariffs right inside of a new Canadian-U.S. trade agreement. So right now the Prime Minister is viewed as a joke all around the world, and that is hurting Canadians economically and, as we've seen, in other ways.
Tom Korski.
Two questions in one, Mr. Poilievre. Count 5 Veterans Affairs ministers in 4 years. Does that matter? And secondly, it's been the convention that the agriculture minister ought to be a farmer, the attorney general ought to be a lawyer. Of those 5, only one had military service. That was the MP for Durham. Does that matter?
That's a very good question. I won't say with finality that every single Minister of Defense or Veterans Affairs must have military experience, but it sure does help. And I think those who have donned a uniform have a special kind of knowledge that the rest of us can never match when it comes to the treatment of our veterans and the administration of our armed forces. So where possible, we should seek out those people to lead those departments. In the case of the outgoing Veterans Affairs Minister, Conservatives cannot understand why he remains in Cabinet. This is a minister who allowed a convicted murderer to have who had never served in the armed forces to have access to veterans benefits. He bungled the pension for life file, and then he insulted veterans by comparing the stress he experienced after leaving a prominent job as a celebrity for a major news network to the post-traumatic stress that people experience after serving in the armed forces. We're surprised that he is now being inflicted on our First Peoples, who deserve so much better from a minister.
Tom, do you have a follow-up?
No, that's
okay.
Thank you.
Rebecca Lindell.
Hi, Mr. Poilievre. Question on China. Ambassador McCallum is expected back in Canada to speak at the Liberal cabinet retreat this week. Do you think that's where he should be, given the situation of Mr. Schellenberg and also the other Canadians detained in China?
I think he should be working to address the crisis in China right now. That's why we sent him there, and he should be there doing his job. The Prime Minister should pick up the phone and help him do that job as well.
Kevin Gallagher.
Mr. Poilievre, what message do you think the government's sending to Canadians replacing the Justice Minister in an election year? Do you think that someone with little experience like Mr. Lametti is up to the challenge of fixing the backlog in courts, potentially deciding on the deportation, a final say for Meng Wanzhou? Is this the right timing to replace that type of a ministry in an election year?
I think that the Prime Minister was trying to fix a crisis over in Veterans Affairs. He had a failed minister who was embarrassing the government and harming veterans, and he desperately needed to move a new minister into that portfolio as quickly as possible. And in the process, he's created some instability in the office of the Justice Minister and Attorney General, and we think that we're going to be watching very carefully to see how that transition plays out this close to an election.
And a follow-up on the rural economic development. How do you view that creation of the ministry? It's not a secret that the Conservatives enjoy a lot of support in rural areas of Canada. Do you view this as putting out a fire or a potential threat to Conservative votes?
It will achieve neither. We know that the number one thing we could do right now to grow the rural economies is to allow for resource development to go ahead. Communities from Alberta all the way to New Brunswick would have benefited from the Energy East pipeline. Rural communities from Alberta all the way to the Pacific Coast, especially Indigenous ones, were demanding the Northern Gateway pipeline and the Trans Mountain pipelines. These projects promise enormous prosperity to rural Canadians. Prime Minister has consistently blocked those projects from going ahead. And now, on the eve of the election, he wants to distract from that record of anti-development and failure by appointing a new bureaucracy. Look, at the end of the day, Justin Trudeau's never had to worry about money, so he doesn't much worry about the money of hardworking rural people. But we will have a real plan to clear the way for resource development and create hundreds of thousands of jobs and cancel the carbon tax so rural people can have an affordable life. And that will be a far more compelling message than the Prime Minister's promise today.
Fair with what's happening in northern BC? I mean, to say that the Prime Minister blocked those projects? I mean, the government bought the Trans Mountain pipeline because they want to have that built. There's a standoff right now over a natural gas pipeline to say that Indigenous communities, all of them want those pipelines built. Is that fair?
It is actually fair, and I'll go through it one by one. Start with the Energy East pipeline. Would have transferred 1 million barrels of Western oil to Eastern refineries. It enjoyed vast public support right across the country. Justin Trudeau changed the rules very late in the application process, requiring that the pipeline be judged not only for its own greenhouse gas emissions, but for the emissions of all of the oil producers and end users who use the pipeline. And that was a rule change very late in the game, and only months later, TransCanada canceled the pipeline altogether. When it comes to Trans Mountain, again, this is a simple project to twin a 60-year-old pipeline that should have gone ahead with no controversy, and yet the Prime Minister's rule changes and increased regulations and his unwillingness to use his constitutional powers to approve the project at all of its stages caused the company to take its money and ours and head to Texas. And when it comes to Northern Gateway, that project had already been approved by the National Energy Board and the previous Conservative cabinet when Justin Trudeau made the decision to cancel it. He vetoed it. Those were his decisions. Now, I'm not telling you that there's no controversy in these pipelines. There are hardcore activists and a lot of foreign money pouring in to prevent these projects from going ahead. They're not going to happen easily, but they have to happen. And it's the job of a prime minister to show leadership in order to get them done. Yes, there will be protests. Yes, there will be parochial politicians who will stomp their feet and make noise. And yes, there will be foreign interests who are trying to keep our oil going to the United States at a discount price, who will fight back fiercely against the projects. But it's the job of the prime minister to fight for Canadian workers and Canadian jobs. And in all three of these cases, he did the opposite. And the result? The Americans get our oil on the cheap, and the Texans get our investment, and the Saudi Arabians and Algerians and Venezuelans get to sell more oil to Canadian and other markets because ours is not able to make it.
I know you're tight for time. We have two more if you have time. Mathieu?
En cette année électorale, comment vous pensez que le gouvernement se positionne avec ce remaniement ministériel ce matin? C'est pas mal le dernier qu'il va avoir avant l'élection, là.
Malheureusement, le gouvernement a échoué à combattre les problèmes que Justin Trudeau a créés. Je pense que partout au pays, les Canadiens revendiquent une réduction de déficit et de taxes, mais le ministre des Finances qui a créé ces problèmes reste en place. Les Canadiens revendiquent un fin à la crise à la frontière, mais les trois ministres qui y sont responsables restent en place. Alors les gros problèmes qu'a créé ce premier ministre vont rester en place pendant des élections et ça va assurer que les conservateurs vont pouvoir mettre de l'avant des plans pour régler des problèmes que les libéraux ont créés dans ces enjeux-là.
Sur un autre sujet, qu'est-ce que vous pensez du Canadien condamné à mort en Chine? Plus loin sur la relation entre le Canada et la Chine qui semble se détériorer.
Moi, je pense que le Premier ministre devrait appeler le leadership chinois afin de s'adresser à cet enjeu, cette crise. Mais ça montre encore que le fait que le Premier ministre n'est pas pris au sérieux par les pays étrangers. En Chine, il a dit que la Chine, la dictateur, le système de dictatorship en Chine est ceux qui l'admirent le plus. Au retour, les Chinois l'ont appelé le petit patate. Il a lancé des guerres de Twitter avec d'autres pays. Il s'est embarrassé en Inde et il a signé une entente de libre-échange avec Donald Trump qui a permis à Trump de garder en place des pénalités sur nos essais, nos aluminiums et notre bois. Alors, je pense que le Premier ministre est vu comme une clown parmi des chefs étrangers et c'est une des raisons pour lesquelles il devrait être remplacé.
Hélène Buzzetti?
Oui, justement, sur la Chine, M. Poilievre, vous avez dit le Premier ministre devrait appeler le leadership, mais j'aimerais savoir précisément qu'est-ce qu'il devrait dire. C'est la politique du Canada, ou ça l'a été dans le passé, que de demander la clémence ou même le rapatriement chaque fois qu'un Canadien fait face à la peine de mort. Croyez-vous que le Canada devrait le faire dans ce cas-ci?
Nous, les conservateurs, avons des préoccupations par rapport au système légal en Chine. Les cas comme ça, on ne peut pas être assuré que le résultat et le verdict est toujours un reflet de la réalité quand on parle d'un pays qui n'a pas le même système légal que nous avons. C'est le rôle, dans une telle situation, c'est le rôle du gouvernement d'intervenir afin de protéger les droits des Canadiens. Même si nous, comme conservateurs et opposition officielle, n'ont pas tous les détails d'un cas individuel, nous allons toujours revendiquer que le gouvernement protège les droits des Canadiens à l'étranger et c'est ce que le Premier ministre devrait faire.
Et ça devrait aller jusqu'à demander la clémence spécifiquement?
Encore, à ce que, comme je viens de dire, le Parti conservateur et l'opposition officielle n'a pas tous les détails par rapport au cas en particulier, mais nous devrions revendiquer que les droits des Canadiens à l'étranger soient protégés. Et c'est surtout le cas dans les pays où le système légal n'est pas à la hauteur de la nôtre.
Do you have time for one more?
One more.
One more,
Yeah.
Todd? Yeah.
The departing minister, Jane Philpott, says she only received 3 questions from the Conservative Party in question period while she was minister. How serious do you take her department? Is Indigenous services something you might do away with if you were in government?
We have a strong track record on the issue, and we'll have a very clear plan that will be distinct from the Liberal failures as it relates to Indigenous peoples. That plan will include allowing First Nations that want natural resource development to have those opportunities. Right now, Justin Trudeau is impoverishing First Nations reserves and communities by blocking natural resource projects that the overwhelming majority of them want to see go ahead. Those projects would create jobs for young people, skills for the local workforce, would fund hospitals and schools for the population and social services for those in need. It would give full independence to many First Nations reserves, and that's why there's a growing coalition representing the strong majority of First Nations where those projects are being proposed that want to see them go ahead. So I think we think one of the best things we can do to allow progress among Indigenous people is to stop the Prime Minister's paternalistic approach, which has blocked those opportunities that First Nations have wanted to achieve. We also supported the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, which gave Indigenous people the ability to see where their money is going. That would go a long way to ensuring that it gets to the people who are most in need. Finally, I would point out that First Nations people are going to suffer as a result of the new Liberal carbon tax. Many, as will all people living in rural and remote communities, it's very expensive to heat your home, to transport between long distances already as it is, and to add to layer on a new carbon tax in northern, remote, and other Indigenous communities will be very costly. So those are some examples of where Conservatives offer far superior alternatives to the failed approach of the Trudeau government.
I've heard about this plan. When will your leader be announcing the plan?
Well, I just gave you some of the broad details right there, and the election platform will be obviously available in the election, but I think it's pretty clear where we stand on a lot of these issues already. We've stated them in the Parliament, the leader's been stating them across the country, and I just reiterated them right now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.